The Fragrant Flower Blooms with Dignity is a super wholesome rom-com. The anime is airing in Japan right now, so I've only read the manga, but it's sweet enough to give you the diabetes. That said, I've only read like the first 45 chapters, so if it turns into a hentai after that, not my fault. But it's kind of your classic tale about the upper class princess falling with the wholesome lower class guy because of his character. Rentaro Samugi has your bad boy delinquent look, but is super soft spoken, nice guy. He goes to Chidori High School, which is located near Kikyo High School, with Chidori being the lower class, blue collar or ghetto high school, and Kikyo being the all girls prestigious private school. Kaoruko Waguri, I screw up the names every time, sorry, is your main girl. Overall, the series is more rom-com than drama, but there's a decent amount of drama that gets resolved pretty quickly. I think one of the strengths and weaknesses of the series is that everyone is super direct, so you don't get a lot of really passive, dragged out plot lines. You kind of have issues and confrontations, and for the most part, they're resolved pretty quickly. And I won't spoil anything, but with every rom-com, you have to wonder, is it rent a girlfriend, or will there be progress in a reasonable fashion? This one does have progress in a reasonable fashion, so I won't go into more detail than that. And you get your typical kind of issues with the upper class kids being snooty, not wanting to associate with the peasants or the plebs, and the lower class kids thinking, oh, they're all rich and stuck up. And obviously this is one of the challenges that needs to be overcome in this situation. And this series does some pretty smart things. Both main characters have a good little friend group that you get to know pretty well and pretty quickly. But because the series does a good job of resolving things quickly, you don't really get a lot of like annoying, overdramatic friends where things drag out forever and they're constantly getting in the way. They're all actually like good friends, so they try to be helpful and understanding, which is pretty refreshing. And it's kind of sad to say that. Even the parents get some backstory and they're fleshed out. And I haven't gotten this far yet, but it seems like even the side characters are going to have their own little stories. And all of the characters feel different enough that they feel like individual people, but you could see them all actually being friends, which I think is a pretty tough thing to balance in a story. But this series does it pretty well. I like Subaru, Waguri's best friend in particular, because she has a hard time dealing with boys. And obviously, delinquent looking boys from the low class school are the worst form of that. So she gets a really nice arc where she has to choose to be a good friend over her own issues. And this is a pretty common theme for a lot of the series. And because it's not dragged out in a way that's really pretentious, it's nice that you get to see the arcs, but they don't go on so long that you dislike the characters. And overall, I think this series does a lot of tropes that you've probably seen before, but it's always in the execution. And I think this one executes them pretty well. The most obvious being Rentaro being into baking and kind of having it as a secret from his friends. I think it's a pretty standard part of any kind of coming of age, teen angsty story, that you have a thing that makes you different, you feel odd or isolated, and you kind of have to come to terms with either living a dual life, hiding who you are, or usually the lesson is that you need to be yourself. And typically you find out that the people around you were accepting anyway, because most things that are a hobby or an interest aren't a deal breaker. And I think the reason the execution for this one is so good is because nothing about it feels forced, or it's not really supposed to be quirky or odd. His parents owning a bakery is just part of his lifestyle. So it's something that he grew up with and is very natural to him. But you could also see why he might be embarrassed or uncomfortable to share with teenage boys that he lives above a bakery. And I think this is something introverts everywhere can relate to, where at some point in your life you had friends over to meet your parents or a girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever, and you're just super uncomfortable the entire time. And part of that's just being a teenager. You don't want people to meet your parents and see that side of you. But I think being super introverted makes it a lot worse, because typically you're not good at driving conversations. And if you bring over someone who's also not super friendly, or your parents aren't, it can get pretty awkward pretty fast. So I think this is a very normal feeling and interaction for a teenage boy, only to realize that his friends obviously don't give a shit. I'd wager most people even now don't actually know what their friends or parents do for work as adults. So it is kind of a funny thing to look back that you fretted over as a kid. And it does a nice job of showing both sides of this kind of story, where Waguri, sort of going against the usual trope, at least in real life, maybe not that uncommon for anime, is sort of the one initiating things, but she's also got to deal with being the one associating with the blue collar school or whatever you want to call it, and kind of trying to hide that fact because she has to worry about the judgment of snooty people. I'll keep this vague, but it's the type of school where when they go on summer break, the teacher's like, you should be doing nothing but study. Like, you should live your entire life for school, getting into a good university, getting a good job, blah, blah, blah. Super career oriented, even at that age. So it's interesting. And I think it does a pretty good job of showing that struggle from both sides. And if you go read it yourself, you'll definitely see comments about people saying they're chopping onions and crying and all kinds of shit. Overall, I would say it's pretty lighthearted, but there's definitely some just really nice, wholesome, emotional moments to go in with the rom-com dynamic. And sometimes it's just really nice to read a really, really feel-good, positive, wholesome story. It's not bogged down by drama or fan service or the kind of ridiculous overanalyzing that I think a lot of rom-coms can slip into. It's just a nice, pleasant story to read with kids that are probably a bit too mature to be real, but it's still done in a way that you can get behind it. If you're into manga, it's a definite recommend for me. And if you're more of an anime person, it should be on Netflix in about a month here. So early September of 2025, it should be out. But I like rom-coms in general, and this for me is definitely on the stronger end of them. So if you're into rom-coms and just kind of feel good stuff in general, I'd check it out. I'm gonna leave it here for this one. If you've read it or watched it, let me know what you think. I try to respond to all the comments that aren't just insults. Like and subscribe and all that shit. Thanks. See ya.